Welcome to Talking Point from the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies.
Tripping, but not falling, the Theological and Pastoral Challenge of Supernatural Psychedelic Reports. By J. Kaleb Graves. This episode first appeared as an article in the December 2023 edition of the Christian Parapsychologist Journal, and may reflect the language and attitudes of the time in which it is written. Responsibility for opinions expressed herein rests solely with the author, and such opinions must not be taken to represent those of the CFPSS. Introduction. It is rare that religious rituals or sacraments offer demonstrable evidence for their efficacy. Adherents believe that they can be tools to interact with some transcendent reality beyond our everyday world, but this is usually taken on faith. However, outside of the mainstream, religious organized religions, there is a renewed element of spiritual life that has a track record for providing evidence of its power: psychedelic drugs. Psychedelic drugs hold unique promise and challenge for the mainstream religions, especially the Christian Church. The visions these drugs induce can be powerful enough to dislodge users from the modern default metaphysic of dogmatic materialism, but these psychedelic visions may also be accompanied by supernatural phenomena which seem to substantiate their content. In preparation for the arrival of psychedelic spiritual technology into the religious mainstream, thoughtful Christians must come to terms with more than these substances' agreed upon natural, physiological effects. Christians must also reconcile their faith with the possibility for psychedelics to generate unpredictable supernatural phenomena. What are psychedelics? There are thousands of known substances which can be defined as psychedelic. The classical psychedelics are probably most familiar: LSD, psilocybin, which is the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, DMT, and mescaline, which is the active ingredient in peyote cacti. These substances have an established safety profile and demonstrated potential for treating mental and physical illness. For this reason, some have recently been decriminalized or legalized for medical use internationally. Other psychedelics, notably 5-MeO-DMT and 2-CB, have only been discovered or become popular more recently and do not have a long-standing tradition of use or established safety profile. These substances primarily bind to serotonin receptors, especially the 5-HT2A receptor. After this initial pharmacological effect, a cascade of neurological and psychological reactions wash over the psychedelic user. Even at moderate doses, profound sensory and cognitive alterations can occur. One prominent example is synesthesia, the blending of senses. One may taste colors, hear smells, or see sounds. Walls seem to breathe or sway rhythmically. Distinct patterns resembling faces or animals can come to life from mundane objects. As dosage is increased, the experience becomes even more bizarre. Hours could seem to last mere seconds, or seconds seem to last hours. Hallucinations of impossible geometry and brand new colors envelop one's vision. The sense of self which is distinct from the surrounding world dissolves, an experience dubbed ego death. Collectively, these drug-induced sensory and cognitive alterations are called a trip, and they can be hard for someone who has never taken a psychedelic to understand. First-person narratives of psychedelic journeys from the people who undergo them are commonly called trip reports, and they are currently the primary means of understanding the elements of a psychedelic trip. Because only the person who has consumed a psychedelic actually experiences the trip, their testimony is usually the only evidence of the phenomena they experienced. By listening to these trip reports, clinicians can begin to form a picture of each psychedelic compound's paradigmatic phenomenology at different dosages, with different means of ingestion, and in different contexts. The Good Friday experiment carried out by Dr. Walter Pahnke in 1962 is a simple demonstration of this principle. In this experiment, 10 seminarians ingested psilocybin, an active ingredient in magic mushrooms. After the experience, which took place in Boston University's Marsh Chapel, the subjects were asked to describe their trips. Among other phenomena, the majority of subjects said that time and space were significantly distorted while under the influence of psilocybin. Subject QX, matter and time seemed to be of no consequence. I was living in the most beautiful reality I had ever known, and it was eternal. Subject TD, the flowing colors seemed to be me. It was infinity. Subject GP, I did not know where I was, nor when I was, nor where I had come from, nor how long I had been there. From these and other recollections of space-time distortion, Dr. Parker rightfully concluded that it was a standard effect caused by psilocybin. Similar phenomenological inventory experiments conducted over the past 70 years have given us an excellent image of standard effects for classic psychedelic substances and some novel substances. Trip reports, both in experimental and non-experimental contexts, have also revealed something else. Supernatural or parapsychological phenomena are sometimes reported among psychedelic users. The history and inventory of parapsychological psychedelic phenomena. Since before the arrival of Spanish colonialism, psychedelic plants and fungi have been associated with supernatural occurrences, particularly clairvoyance. In early 1590, the Spanish physician Francisco Hernández recorded the common belief that those who ate peyote were able to foresee and predict things. Early Catholic catechisms, prosecutions, and prohibitions against peyote, psilocybin mushrooms, and other psychoactive plants betrays the belief that these plants and fungi were actually capable of contacting powerful indigenous gods and spirits, whom the Spaniards interpreted as demons. One illustration from the Codex Magliabechiano even depicts an Aztec god clutching the head of a man consuming psychedelic mushrooms. There was also an early skepticism about the purportedly supernatural properties of psychedelics, but this skepticism reiterates just how common these supernatural psychedelic experiences were. In Problems and Miraculous Secrets of the Indians, the Spanish physician Juan de Cardenas repeats that peyote and morning glory seeds, which contained psychedelic ergin alkaloids, were thought to have magic powers. He reports that those who used these substances were believed to conjure Satan, who tells them of things to come, or described secrets that have occurred. However, Cardenas believed that this was a result of low intelligence among indigenous, black, or common people who interpreted the peyote dreams of the body in supernatural terms. He claimed that the visions were a natural result of these plants' biology, without any relation to the supernatural. Belief in the psychedelic supernatural powers continued in indigenous communities despite church repression, and it was not until the mid-20th century that science became interested. From the beginning, this scientific interest had a tint of supernaturalism. When Albert Hofmann discovered the psychedelic properties of lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, in 1943, it was an accident of happenstance. Hofmann reported that, despite first synthesizing LSD in 1938 and determining it to be of no interest, he was overcome with a peculiar presentiment that this substance might possess properties beyond those established in the first pharmacological studies. Notwithstanding strict laboratory safety protocols, Hofmann was somehow dosed with LSD and became aware of its potent psychoactive effects. This unusual series of events led him to ascribe a kind of consciousness or autonomy to LSD, saying, "I did not discover LSD, LSD found and called me." Between 1943 and the international prohibition against psychedelics in the 1970s, a number of psychologists began reporting significant preternatural psychic events that occurred within their own personal use, therapeutic sessions, or even in medical studies. These experiences primarily fit into four categories: precognition, clairvoyance, contact with the dead, and contact with spiritual beings. At first glance, it is easy and indeed necessary to be skeptical towards these claims. Methodologically naturalist answers can often be provided. Many trip reports which contain supernatural occurrences can be explained by the innate confusion brought on by drug use. psychedelic trips can be overwhelming, and the person who undergoes the experience may not be a reliable narrator about what happened while their senses and cognition were altered in bizarre ways. In one interview study, 16 out of 40 subjects reported experiencing telepathy while under the influence of psychedelics. For instance, one subject reported that a discussion with his equally inebriated girlfriend was telepathic. He believed this because he suddenly became aware of using his mouth to speak long after the conversation started. Of course, it is possible that a distorted sense of self and altered sensory function can account for this supposed telepathy. Perhaps, his brain simply did not register that his mouth was moving, and then it was a shock once it did. Some of these purported supernatural occurrences can also be explained as confirmation bias. In this skeptical model, researchers looking for evidence of a soul or some other spiritual reality read into psychedelic phenomena. After his first LSD trip, the aforementioned Dr. Walter Pahnke wrote a report of his experiences. It included a description of going down deep into a dark, silent pool with a flowing spring of silvery white liquid overflowing upward. Dr. William Richards, a researcher at Johns Hopkins University and friend of Pahnke, reports that this may have been a form of precognition. Pahnke died unexpectedly in a scuba diving accident, indeed descending into dark, silent water while the white bubbles expelled from his gear floated upwards. For Richards, this similarity seems too difficult to explain away. To an outside observer, however, it may appear more like a grief-stricken loved one grasping for meaning in the midst of tragedy. Other supernatural reports could be attributed to chance. The American psychologist Stanley Krippner claimed that after taking psilocybin, he had a vision of President John F. Kennedy being shot. This trip occurred months before Kennedy's assassination in Dallas. Of course, psychedelic trips include a cascade of many images, not unlike dreams. Sometimes, these images may later be imbued with special meaning, especially after traumatic or tragic events. Those images that have no importance are not counted as failed precognition, and this creates a sort of survivorship bias. This psychological process could also be the origin of indigenous and early Spanish beliefs about psychedelic plants and fungi. As previously described, peyote and psilocybin mushrooms were considered particularly useful for learning secret information or the future. Franciscan Inquisition records show that in early 1630, a man named Gonzalo Perez took psilocybin mushrooms to find his lost wife. In his psychedelic vision, Talking Snake appeared and revealed his wife's precise location 2 miles away, and she was delivered home safely. This was taken by some to be evidence of the supernatural. Of course, another similar occurrence in which a different man's wife was found dead in the wrong location was not considered evidence against clairvoyance. Closely related to survivorship bias is the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, which creates an illusion of meaningful frequencies. One may buy a new white Tesla and begin noticing them everywhere. Because ownership of that model gives it special meaning, one is more likely to notice when they see that car instead of a model without special meaning. Psychedelic visions may create similar illusions on a more profound scale. William Richards records another parapsychological occurrence which may be explained in this way. Under the effects of LSD in a clinical trial, one of Richards' subjects reported seeing 2 otherworldly, dancing figures. In a follow-up visit, this same subject happened across a picture of the dancing Hindu gods Vishnu and Shiva in Richards' waiting room. The subject declared that these were the figures that he had seen. Because of this subject's limited education and experience in urban Baltimore, Richards interpreted this story to mean that there are archetypes resembling Vishnu and Shiva buried in the human psyche. However, Richards also recognized that skeptics could respond to this story quite easily. It is possible that this image was unimportant when it was planted in the subject's memory. It was later remembered during the psychedelic vision and only gained real meaning when it was discovered again in Richards' waiting room. Entity encounters and external evidence. While some trip reports containing supernatural occurrences can be explained naturally, there are still others which are difficult to explain. These are experiences which have clear, external validation of their legitimacy beyond someone's trip report. These reports usually involve messages from beings met within psychedelic visions. While using high doses of psychedelics, particularly DMT, people have described meeting beings which live in the psychedelic, or spiritual, otherworlds. Dr. Rick Strassman reports a number of such encounters with freakish creatures resulting from DMT research with the University of New Mexico. Subject Chris: then there were 3 beings, 3 physical forms. There were rays coming out of their bodies and then back to their bodies. They were reptilian and humanoid, trying to make me understand, not with words, but with gestures. Subject Willow: there were gremlins, small faces, mostly. They had wings and tails and stuff. I paid them little attention. The larger beings were there to sustain and support me. That was their realm. A sort of good and evil thing, the gremlins versus the tall beings. Subject Rex: there was a female. I felt like I was dying, then she appeared and reassured me. When I was with her, I had a deep feeling of relaxation and tranquility. She had an elongated head. These alien creatures may be more familiar when put in the context of the prophetic scripture. Strassman compares these DMT trips to encounters with heavenly and hellish beings recorded in the visions of the prophets, particularly Ezekiel and Daniel. In Ezekiel 1, the prophet encounters the infamous many-eyed wheels within wheels, but he also encounters human-animal hybrids. Having the likeness of man, they nonetheless also had animal faces, wings, and forms of light emanating from their bodies. In Daniel 7, the prophet encounters similarly bizarre human-animal hybrids and beasts with many eyes. Other entities encountered during psychedelic trips may be intimately known and recognized by the person undergoing the experience. These entities may take the form of deceased friends and family, or they may resemble figures of worship and veneration. For instance, one minister described meeting Christ in an LSD vision, Christ standing motionless in resplendent, radiant beauty. He had form, but I could almost see through him, yet I was not really seeing. There was immeasurable power, love. I love him with a profundity beyond description. I could grasp his feet and ankles. I embraced this formless form with an infinite love. Especially considering that the minister was a woman, this scene is reminiscent of iconography from the Gospels. One may easily call to mind the parallels between this scene and Mary Magdalene washing the feet of Jesus, or Mary Magdalene falling before the feet of her risen rabbi at the empty garden tomb. In psychedelic visions, both bizarre and beloved beings can be encountered. Reportedly, both can even offer specific revelations that turn out to be true. Unlike vague premonitions of President Kennedy's assassination, or Walter Parker descending into deep water, these revelations include precise, falsifiable information that cannot be easily attributed to chance or a trick of the mind. One of these stories yet again involves Dr. Walter Parker. After Parker's tragic death, his wife Eva sought to reconcile the loss with her continued life. Dr. Stanislav Grof, a friend and colleague, agreed to guide her through an LSD trip to face the trauma of her husband's death. Eva, herself an accomplished psychologist, reported that her husband's spirit appeared to her within the LSD trip. In addition to providing his wife with comforting words and instructions for moving on after his death, Walter asked Eva for a favor. He asked her to return a book which he had borrowed from a friend before his death. The instructions were complete with the book's location in their attic, its exact location on a bookshelf, the title, and the owner's name. Despite reportedly having no prior knowledge of this tome, Eva was able to find and return the book, exactly as the psychedelic vision of Walter had described. In addition to this story, Grof describes a parapsychological occurrence that resembles traditional mediumship. While treating a young patient with LSD, the patient claimed to telepathically receive a message from discarnate beings in the psychedelic realm. This included the name, street address, and phone number of a couple in a nearby city. the eerie entities asked the patient and Groff to tell this couple that their son Ladislav was safe and well. After the number. During a short conversation, Groff learned that this couple did indeed have a son named Ladislav, but he had died about 3 weeks prior. Outside of clinical contexts, these sorts of stories proliferate recreational psychedelic subculture. Shane Morse is a comedian with one such story. He describes disbelieving that the psychedelic realm was anything more than a hallucination, and he asked the beings he met during one trip for proof that they were real. In a later DMT trip, Morse was ricocheted into a surreal carnival filled with specific, memorable details. In this trip, he spent a great deal of time with a purple female humanoid. He felt strongly that this woman loved him, and he loved her. The next day, Morse gave his friend DMT for the first time without mentioning his own trip. This friend reported being in the same carnival, complete with the same details. This included a purple woman who said that she loved Morse. In such cases, chance or tricks of the mind cannot reasonably explain these occurrences. One thing can: fraud. For instance, the patient could have known that Groff was interested in evidence of the supernatural, and he created an elaborate hoax. Perhaps Eva Parker made up the entire story because she wanted to give hope to Walter's surviving friends, family, and young children, or she wished to legitimize an actual and verifiable experience she had. Such hoaxes, even well-meaning ones intended to provide the grieving with hope, are not uncommon in the history of parapsychology. While the hoax explanation can be reason enough to reject purported supernatural occurrences in a scientific context, what of the clergy, whose job is to nurture the soul, not interrogate or crush its hopes? How should clergy respond to these stories? Soul care and psychedelics. The Christian Church is just beginning to realize the implications of psychedelics. Recent academic publications and popular discussions demonstrate that this topic is finally being studied by serious Christians' minds. Yet, the discussion still primarily resides in the domain of naturalist medicine. Of course, psychedelics' potential for successfully treating severe illness is exciting and needs to be a central topic for discussion. However, the question of how to handle resulting supernatural reports remains taboo, unknown, or dubious. This situation cannot continue. Both clergy and laity must be prepared to provide guidance and care, not just for those whose ailments have been treated by psychedelic visions, but also those who claim their visions revealed real, spiritual knowledge. If someone like Eva Parker walked into a minister's office, what response should she receive? The method of pastoral care is not the same as the scientific method. Surely, one would not want to baselessly and heartlessly accuse a widow of fraud, but can a shepherd allow the unverifiable story to shape the beliefs of fellow believers within the congregation? Likewise, what of psychedelic experiences which have a naturalist explanation, but this explanation is not acceptable to the one who underwent the trip? Psychedelic trips have a demonstrated potential to change people's metaphysical beliefs away from dogmatic materialism. One survey found that 2/3 of psychedelic drug users who identified as atheists before their trip stopped identifying as atheists afterwards. Another study found that about 30% of those who used psychedelic drugs came to believe in spiritual realities, such as God or universal consciousness, as a result of the experience. What kind of pastoral care should these people receive? Consider a narrative example of this data. In a Reddit thread, someone with the screen name Mikadash recalled reverting to Christianity after meeting Jesus on a high-dose mushroom trip. They explained that Jesus recommended that they read the Gospel of Thomas and Gospel of Philip. Jesus also described their contents. This was preposterous to Mikadash, who was not a Christian and had never heard of apocryphal Gospels. Yet, after coming down from the trip, they found that not only were the Gospel of Thomas and Gospel of Philip real, but their content matched what the vision of Jesus described. Of course, one can always find a natural explanation. Assuming that the story is true, perhaps they had heard of the apocryphal Gospels and merely forgot, just as may have happened to the man who saw the dancing Shiva and Vishnu. Yet, Mikadash was unconvinced by natural explanations, unable to reduce the Jesus they encountered to a mere hallucination. Of course, a minister would not want to bulldoze someone's newly found faith with flippant dismissal or accusations of fraud. Yet, it is highly doubtful that many clergy would want their congregation's theology to be formed by a vision of the psychedelic Gnostic Jesus-bearing revelations about apocryphal Gospels. Caught between the rock of pastoral care and the hard place of reasonable skepticism, how can a minister of Christ's gospel and Christians at large approach these issues? Looking to both Scripture and Christian tradition, a number of possibilities may take shape, though these are hardly the only options within this new question of pastoral theology. As a starting place, one should consider the story of Paul's going to Jerusalem in Acts 21. In Tyre, the church receives a prophecy from the Spirit and urges Paul not to go to Jerusalem, verse 4. Yet Paul still continues his journey to Jerusalem. Along the way, he is met by the prophet Agabus, who warns Paul that he will be arrested, verses 10 and 11. Again, Paul chooses to go to Jerusalem. There, his arrest would be the starting point of his journey to martyrdom. To justify his actions, Paul explains that he is ready to die for Christ, verses 13 to 15. In this story, the prophetic imagery is accurate, yet implications are unclear. When faced with psychedelic revelations from a known and trusted congregation, this may be a principle upon which ministers draw. Even if the substance vision is convincing or proves accurate, theology or praxis gained through implication may not be. Such implications should be regarded with careful skepticism. Another option may arise by retrieving a Christian theology of dreams, which has become a lost art within the Church. Until the end of late antiquity, dreams were categorized as visions which occurred at night. Like waking visions, they could be revelations from God or journeys into the celestial realm of heaven. There is a cornucopia of sources instructing Christians about approaching dreams and distinguishing between physiological and spiritual causes. In Scripture, Paul has a night vision of the Macedonian man, yet he is not immediately convinced that this vision was from God. Acts 16:10 records that Paul had to conclude that the message was from God, no doubt after some form of deliberation. The Church Fathers also record numerous ways to understand these visions of the night. The Philokalia, a classic of the Eastern Orthodox contemplative tradition, provides numerous nuanced oniric perspectives that warrant consideration. As an example, Bishop Diadochos of Photiki, circa 400 to 486, provides criteria for distinguishing between the rare dreams which are revelations from God, and those dreams which are nothing more than images reflecting our wandering thoughts. Diadochos also suggests that the safest route is to not proactively decide that some dreams come from God. Instead, Christians can enjoy the comfort that good dreams provide as a blessing, not a message-laden revelation. Perhaps this is one pastoral approach which can be explored for psychedelics. The comfort they provide may be legitimate, though Christians should be agnostic about any revelatory content. Conclusion. Without any doubt, this is a complex issue that must be explored deeply by a diversity of thinkers, but one thing is certain. Clergy and theologians should not repeat the same mistakes their vocation made 500 years ago. They should not demonize what they do not understand, particularly when it comes to indigenous culture and practices. They also should not follow the bigoted footsteps of Juan de Cardenas, relegating psychedelic supernatural experiences to the realm of acid casualties, burnouts, and primitive, indigenous practitioners. As the Church begins to come to terms with psychedelics as a cultural and medical phenomenon, trip reports involving supernatural occurrences cannot be ignored. Indeed, they may be a place where the role and tools of clergy may supersede that of the clinician who is rightfully bound by scientific suspicion. Regardless of whether one believes the stories are evidence for a supernatural realm, Christians must take these trip reports seriously, and those who underwent these experiences must be treated with earnest compassion.
You have been listening to Talking Point from the Church's Fellowship for Psychical and Spiritual Studies. To find out more, please visit www.churchesfellowship.co.uk.